Precision fermented dairy is one of those rare intersections where cutting-edge biotechnology quietly slips into the realm of halakhic thought and creates an entirely new frontier. To understand why it has become such a focal point in Jewish legal discussion, you first need to imagine how dramatically different this technology is from traditional dairy production. Instead of milking cows, scientists program yeast or fungi with a genetic blueprint for specific dairy proteins, most commonly casein and whey. These microbes are placed in controlled fermentation tanks, fed sugars and nutrients, and then they produce dairy proteins that are molecularly identical to the proteins found in cow's milk. Once purified, these proteins can be blended with plant-based fats, sugars, and minerals to create cheese, yogurt, ice cream, and even milk analogs that taste and melt like the real thing. This innovation creates a food that has the functionality of dairy without requiring an animal. For many consumers, that alone is a nutritional and ethical triumph. The proteins are chemically the same as those derived from cows, but the production process avoids lactose, reduces methane emissions, and offers far more control over allergens and contaminants. From a halakhic perspective, however, this is exactly what makes the discussion both fascinating and unusually optimistic. The product looks like milk, behaves like milk, and might be labeled as dairy, yet the traditional triggers for dairy halacha are absent. There is no cow, no milking, no Shalav Yisrael question, and no possibility of animal-based mixture concerns. The halakhic system must therefore ask whether the status, dairy, follows the molecular identity of the protein or the biological origin of the substance. One of the foundational halakhic categories at stake is whether these foods should be treated as shalav, actual milk. Since precision-fermented dairy does not originate from a mammal, many poskim argue that it cannot be classified as milk in the biblical sense. The Torah's prohibition on mixing meat and milk refers to the milk of a kosher animal. Because these engineered proteins come from microorganisms, the product appears to fall outside the biblical definition altogether. This opens the door, quite naturally and with a surprising level of rabbinic confidence, to treating precision-fermented dairy as pareve. That designation would mean that foods made with these proteins could be eaten with meat, served in fleishig restaurants, and used in contexts where dairy is traditionally restricted. A second category worth exploring is whether the fermentation process imposes a mavashal, cooked, or processed status on the final product. In classical halacha, cooking can change the way we treat certain foods, especially regarding mixtures or the way blessings are assigned. But here, the production process more closely resembles the making of wine from grapes in a vat, except the grapes, so to speak, never existed. Fermentation is seen by many halakhic authorities as a process that defines a new substance rather than modifying a pre-existing one that had its own halakhic identity. This tends to strengthen the argument for a permissive framework. If the milk proteins never halakhically existed as milk, then cooking or fermenting them does not confer dairy status. A third arena, more modern but equally central, is the question of Javina Zakum, the prohibition on cheese made by non-Jews without proper oversight. Traditional dairy cheese requires rennet, an enzyme that once came from the stomach lining of calves. That made rabbinic oversight critical. Precision-fermented dairy, by contrast, can use enzymes that are themselves bioengineered and never derived from animals. If the core dairy proteins and the coagulating enzymes come entirely from non-animal sources, then the classical reasons for restrictions on cheese produced by non-Jews may no longer apply. Many contemporary rabbis see this as an opportunity. The halakhic barriers that complicated global kosher cheese production for centuries could be sidestepped entirely. It is one of the few examples where advancing technology simplifies Jewish dietary law rather than complicating it. Of course, every new technology brings questions that demand careful attention. Some rabbinic authorities raise concerns about marid ayin, the possibility that a product visually indistinguishable from dairy might cause confusion. Yet here, too, the tone of discussion has been notably constructive. Many argue that labeling, supervision, and popular education can resolve the issue. In a world where almond milk is poured into fleishig coffee shops, kosher consumers are already accustomed to products that mimic dairy but function halakhically as pareve. Precision-fermented dairy would simply expand that category, not undermine it. Another layer of inquiry explores whether inserting a cow gene into microbes constitutes an act of kalayim, forbidden hybridity. Yet this too generally leans toward leniency, because halacha traditionally applies the laws of Kalayam to plant and animal breeding, not to microscopic gene editing. Microbes do not fall under the classical categories of species to which these prohibitions apply. Even more positively, several prominent authorities have noted that genetic engineering may offer real benefits to human health, benefits that halacha tends to view favorably when no explicit prohibition is breached. Taken together, these discussions reveal something unusual. Precision-fermented dairy is prompting halakhic authorities to consider a food that uses high technology to simplify Jewish practice, reduce ethical concerns, and expand accessible options for observant consumers. Rather than being caught in a web of uncertainty, many poskim see a clear path forward, one that encourages innovation while respecting tradition. There is a sense that this technology aligns with halacha's long-standing principle that the legal status of food depends on its essence, not its appearance, and on its source, not its marketing label. If anything, the most uplifting part of this halakhic conversation is the convergence around a shared idea that new tools can enhance Jewish life rather than complicate it. Precision-fermented dairy allows observant Jews to enjoy dairy-like foods without navigating the challenges of Shalav Yisrael, without worrying about animal welfare implications, and without facing the environmental concerns associated with industrial farming. It points to a future in which kosher food industries can become more sustainable, more humane, and more consistent with the ethical ideals embedded in halacha itself. For now, the discussion continues, but with an unmistakably positive tone. This is one of those moments where the halakhic process demonstrates its flexibility and its ability to meet the future with clarity rather than hesitation. Precision fermentation may be a laboratory invention, but its implications resonate deeply with the living tradition of Jewish dietary law, and that alignment gives many rabbinic voices confidence that this emerging field can be embraced thoughtfully, responsibly, and even enthusiastically.